The ballroom shimmered like a jewel box brought to life. Chandeliers dripped with light that scattered across polished marble floors, and the air smelled of roses and old money. Women in gowns that cost more than a year's rent glided across the room, while men in tailored suits laughed over glasses of champagne. It was the annual Vale Foundation Gala, a night when wealth displayed itself not quietly but like a roar. And at the center of it all stood Adrian Vale. Everyone knew his name. Billionaire, heir to a dynasty of shipping and tech empires, and the kind of man who had been raised to believe the world bent for him. He was tall, immaculately dressed in a black tuxedo, his smile charming but edged with the kind of arrogance that came from never hearing the word no. People leaned toward him when he spoke, desperate for his attention. Ella Reed was not one of those people. She moved through the glittering crowd in her waitress uniform, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. She kept her eyes down, her steps careful, rehearsed. She had learned early on that the best way to survive in places like this was to be invisible. Just another pair of hands, another shadow in the room. She didn't belong to this world. She only borrowed a glimpse of it while working shifts that would pay for her mother's medicine, and maybe a few textbooks for her own studies. But fate rarely cared for invisibility. "Hey, you there." The voice carried across the table like a command. Heads turned. Adrian Vale's eyes were locked on her, and suddenly the air felt thinner. Ella stopped mid-step, the tray trembling slightly in her hand. "Yes, sir," she asked cautiously, her voice polite, neutral. Adrian smirked. "Put that tray down. I have a dare for you." The group of socialites surrounding him leaned in amused. They loved his games, his little displays of dominance. He thrived on them. Ella's throat tightened. "A dare." "Yes," Adrian said smoothly, rising to his feet. His presence loomed larger when he stood, every eye in the room now drawn to them. "Dance with me? Right here, in front of everyone. Unless you're afraid." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. People whispered, smiling, waiting for the waitress to stammer, to turn red, to make a fool of herself. That was the entertainment Adrian promised, the spectacle of power. Ella's heart pounded. She hated attention, hated the feeling of all those glittering eyes pressing down on her. She wanted to vanish into the walls, but then her gaze met Adrian's. That arrogant smile, that expectation of her surrender. Something inside her sparked. Her voice, calm and steady, broke through the whispers. "Afraid," she repeated softly, almost like tasting the word. Then she tilted her chin, her eyes steady on his. "No, I'm just wondering if you can keep up." The room gasped. A hush fell, broken only by the faint notes of the orchestra tuning their instruments. Adrian's smirk flickered, faltered for the briefest moment. The waitress had dared to challenge the king. And everyone knew. The night had just changed. The orchestra's strings swelled as if destiny itself had lifted the conductor's baton. The music seemed to answer Ella's challenge before anyone else could breathe. Adrian Vale extended his hand toward her, his trademark smirk returning as though to remind everyone he still held control. "Shall we, then?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with irritation that she had flipped his dare on him. Ella stared at the hand. Every rational part of her wanted to say no, to walk away, to let the laughter die on its own. But something inside her, something stronger than fear, pushed her forward. With a careful grace, she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were smaller, work-worn, but steady. The crowd shifted, chairs scraping against the floor as people turned to watch. To them, this was spectacle, a billionaire humiliating a waitress. They expected awkward stumbles, a clumsy attempt at elegance. They expected her to be entertainment. But Ella had a secret. When she was younger, her mother used to save scraps of money for dance lessons. Just a few. Not enough to become a professional, but enough to plant rhythm into Ella's bones, enough to remind her that movement could be freedom. She hadn't danced in years, but the music was like an old friend. Adrian pulled her into the center of the ballroom. His confidence was absolute, his steps sharp and practiced. He thought he was leading, but within moments he realized the truth. Ella wasn't stumbling. She wasn't even following. She was meeting him beat for beat, her movements fluid, her spins precise, her eyes steady on his like a dare within a dare. The room hushed, a stunned silence replacing the laughter. Adrian's chest tightened. He had expected obedience. He had expected fragility. Instead, he found himself in a battle of wills on the dance floor, and to his shock, he wasn't sure he was winning. Whispers began, sharp as sparks. "Who is she? Did you see that turn?" She's incredible!" Ella's hair, tied back neatly at the start of her shift, loosened with the momentum of a spin, a few strands framing her face. The chandeliers caught the light in her eyes, turning them into fire. Every step she took owned the floor. Every twirl declared she belonged there just as much as anyone in a gown worth thousands. Adrian tried to regain dominance, tightening his lead, forcing sharper turns. But Ella moved with him seamlessly, her body answering every challenge with quiet defiance. She wasn't mocking him, but she wasn't surrendering either. She was simply equal. By the time the final note of the orchestra rang through the hall, Ella let go of his hand and stepped back with a slight bow of her head. Her breath came quickly, but her posture was unbroken. And then it happened. Applause. Not the polite clapping of obligation, but thunderous, genuine applause that shook the ballroom. Adrian stood frozen. His pride, his arrogance, both fractured under the weight of what just happened. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale was not the center of admiration. Ella was. Adrian Vale was not used to silence. He was used to being followed by the echo of his own importance. Applause, laughter, admiration. But after that dance, the applause hadn't been for him. It was for her. The image replayed in his head long after the gala had ended. Ella's fire in her eyes, the strength in her movements, the way she had transformed humiliation into triumph. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was just a waitress who got lucky. But the truth pressed into him like a stone in his shoe. She had exposed him. For the first time in years, Adrian had felt small. He retreated to his penthouse that night, a glass of whiskey in his hand, city lights sprawling beneath him. But no matter how expensive the drink or how high the skyline, he couldn't shake the memory of her words. "I'm just wondering if you can keep up." That defiancy, it was something money couldn't buy. Over the next few days, his curiosity gnawed at him. Who was she? Not just her name, Ella Reed, but who she really was. Why had she danced like that? Why had she stood against him when so many bowed? Adrian's assistant provided him with details. Though not much a scholarship student at a modest university, double majoring in literature and economics. She worked shifts as a waitress to cover what her scholarship didn't, and she lived in a small apartment with her mother. Her father had left years ago, abandoning them without explanation. Adrian expected to feel triumph at discovering her ordinary life. Instead, he felt something unfamiliar, shame. Because while she was juggling classes, jobs, and the care of a sick mother, he had spent years hiding behind arrogance and money. He'd been raised in mansions, yes, but also in loneliness. His father had been alive, but absent, locked away in meetings and mistresses, leaving Adrian to learn early that wealth could buy almost anything except love. His arrogance had been armor, his charm a mask, and Ella, with one dance, had slipped a blade between both. Meanwhile, Ella returned to her small apartment, peeling off her uniform and curling beside her mother, who slept fitfully on the couch. The old radiator rattled, and the medicine bottles on the table seemed to multiply every week. Ella's body ached from the night, but her mind spun. She hadn't planned to challenge Adrian Vale, but when he dared her, she couldn't swallow her pride. "Everything okay at work?" Her mother murmured, half asleep. Ella forced a smile. "Just another night," she whispered. But in her chest, she carried something she couldn't name. Anger at Adrian's arrogance, pride in herself, and a strange spark of curiosity about why a man with the world at his feet needed to try to humiliate her in the first place. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night had changed them both. The next morning, Ella was back to reality. Gone were the chandeliers, the gowns, the hushed whispers of admiration. She stood behind the counter of the small downtown cafe, where she worked morning shifts, her hair tied back, apron knotted around her waist. The smell of espresso and fresh bread clung to the air, and regular customers shuffled in with bleary eyes, craving caffeine more than conversation. She liked it that way. Ordinary. Safe, no spotlight, no applause. Just her, the hum of the coffee machine, and the rhythm of serving lattes and bagels. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Ella glanced up. Her stomach sank. Adrian Vale. He was unmistakable even without the tuxedo, tall, confident. Every inch of him screaming wealth even in casual clothes. The cafe seemed to tilt around him, customers whispering as they recognized the billionaire who had been in last night's headlines. Ella's first instinct was to duck into the back. The last thing she wanted was another spectacle. But Adrian caught her eye and, to her surprise, gave her something that looked suspiciously like a sheepish smile. "Morning," he said as he approached the counter. "Coffee black." And maybe a chance to apologize. Ella folded her arms, her eyebrows arching. "Apologize? For what? Trying to turn me into your party trick?" A couple of customers nearby perked their ears, curious. Adrian lowered his voice. "I didn't mean it that way. It was supposed to be fun," she snorted. "Fun for you, maybe. Humiliation for me." Adrian winced. "Fair. But you weren't humiliated, you—" He stopped himself, because saying you were incredible felt too raw. Instead, he tried again. "You surprised me?" Ella stared at him unamused. "Is that your version of flattery?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I don't do this. I don't chase people down in cafes. But after last night, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Not because of the scandal, not because of the dance, but because you didn't let me win." Something in his voice tugged at Ella despite herself. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't grandstanding. For once, Adrian Vale looked human. She sighed and poured his coffee. "Here, one black coffee. And don't expect a free pass just because you said you're sorry." He smiled faintly, taking the cup. "Then maybe I'll just keep showing up until you believe me." And he did. Over the next week, Adrian returned again and again. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for pastries he barely touched. But always for conversation. He asked about her studies, her favorite books, her dreams. She answered cautiously at first, then with more ease, surprised by how he actually listened. In return, he shared pieces of himself he rarely showed the world. His childhood loneliness, the emptiness behind his fortune, the way wealth had never filled the silence in his life. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Yet slowly, like two mismatched puzzle pieces, they began to fit. At first, their friendship was quiet. It existed in stolen hours over coffee, in unexpected conversations that stretched longer than Eller ever intended, in the strange comfort of realizing that even billionaires could be lonely. For a little while, it felt safe. But nothing about Adrian Vale's life stayed quiet for long. A week after the gala, the first headline appeared. "Waitress sweeps billionaire off his feet." It was splashed across glossy magazines and online tabloids, accompanied by photos of Ella behind the cafe counter, blurry shots of Adrian sitting by the window with his coffee, and one picture of them laughing together. The caption beneath twisted the moment into something salacious. "Vale's new charity case." Ella's stomach turned when she saw it. Her phone buzzed endlessly with classmates and coworkers forwarding the article, some with teasing comments, others with thinly veiled envy. By the end of the week, it wasn't just one article, it was dozens, each more cruel than the last. From tray to trophy, the waitress who caught a billionaire's eye. As Adrian Vale slumming it for fun. At work, whispers followed her. A group of customers snickered openly, one woman sneering, "Must be nice to catch the golden goose." "Think he'll buy you a mansion?" Even at university, people stared. A friend she thought she could trust joked, "So, are you dropping out now that you've got your billionaire sponsor?" Ella's cheeks burned. Each word felt like a slap, each laugh a chain dragging her down. She had worked so hard to be known for her mind, her resilience, and now she was reduced to gossip. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. One evening, after closing the cafe, she found Adrian waiting outside in his sleek black car. He stepped out, smiling as though eager to see her. But his smile faltered at the look on her face. "You need to stop," Ella said sharply, before he could speak. Adrian blinked. "Stop what?" "Coming here, talking to me. Whatever this is." Her voice shook, not with fear but with frustration. "Do you know what people are saying about me? That I'm your project. Your pity date. That I'm only worth something because you noticed me." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That's not true. I don't see you that way." Ella's eyes burned. "Maybe not. But the world does. And I can't afford it, Adrian. I don't have the luxury of brushing it off." Every whisper sticks to me. Every headline follows me into class, into work, into my home. He stepped closer, desperate. Ella, listen, it's not pity. His voice cracked, but the words wouldn't come. Feelings he barely understood tangled in his throat. She shook her head. You live in a world that devours people like me, and I can't afford to be devoured. Her words cut deep, sharper than she realized. For the first time since their dance, Ella walked away from him. Adrian stood in the street silent as her figure disappeared into the night. For once, the man who had everything felt utterly powerless. Days blurred into weeks, but the silence between them stretched longer than Adrian could bear. Ella had vanished from his world as quickly as she had entered it, and Adrian, for the first time in years, found himself restless. He buried himself in work. Contracts, mergers, board meetings. His calendar overflowed, but no deal, no accomplishment could quiet the echo of her voice. I can't afford to be devoured. At night, he returned to his penthouse, the city glittering below like a million diamonds scattered on black velvet. Yet the view that had once made him feel powerful now mocked him with emptiness. What good were glass towers and private jets when every room was hollow, when no laughter filled the silence? Adrian tried to distract himself the only way he knew: parties. He threw another gala, invited the same glittering crowd, surrounded himself with the same shallow praise. But it all felt flat. Every smile seemed false, every toast hollow, and when he raised a glass, he caught himself wishing Ella were there to roll her eyes at the ridiculousness of it all. He realized then what scared him most. Not that she had left, but that she had seen him. Truly seen him. Beneath the arrogance and money, she had glimpsed the lonely boy he still was. And instead of clinging to him, she had walked away. One evening, as the weight of it all pressed in, Adrian stood before the mirror in his penthouse. The man staring back was polished, powerful, perfect, yet behind the tailored suit, his eyes were tired. Who are you without the wealth? He muttered to his reflection. The silence answered. Meanwhile, Ella was fighting her own battles. She poured herself into schoolwork, into caring for her mother, into anything that distracted her from the headlines that still refused to die. But even as she pushed Adrian from her mind, she couldn't forget the way he had looked at her during those late cafe talks. Not as a billionaire, but as a man stripped of armor. She wanted to hate him, but part of her knew he wasn't just arrogance. He was also broken. The next Vale Foundation gala arrived sooner than expected. Ella had sworn she wouldn't go near another of his glittering circuses, but her cafe job had been contracted to cater. Once again, she found herself moving through the hall with trays of champagne, invisible among the gowns. Adrian spotted her instantly, and this time, he didn't smirk, didn't dare. He stood on the stage with a microphone in hand, his usual speech about profits and philanthropy discarded. Instead, he spoke from somewhere deeper. He told the room about dignity, about resilience, about the quiet strength of people who worked harder than anyone in that ballroom would ever understand. He spoke of courage in the face of judgment, of people who carried more worth in their silence than billionaires carried in their fortunes. He didn't name her, but every word was Ella. From the back of the room, she listened, her heart pounding. For the first time, Adrian Vale wasn't the arrogant billionaire everyone admired. He was a man trying, failing, stumbling, but trying to be better, and Ella felt the wall she had built around her heart tremble. The gala ended in waves of applause, but Adrian hardly heard any of it. For the first time in his life, he had given a speech that wasn't polished for optics or engineered for investors. He had spoken from somewhere raw, a place he barely recognized within himself, and though the crowd clapped, it was one pair of eyes he searched for among the sea of diamonds and tuxedos. Ella had slipped toward the back as soon as she could, unwilling to linger in the spotlight he always seemed to create. But she hadn't left. Something in his words had pinned her in place. Now, as the guests filed out, she found herself drawn toward the open terrace where the night air whispered against marble columns. And there he was. Adrian stood with his hands resting on the balcony's edge, the city lights flickering below like restless stars. For once, he didn't look like the arrogant billionaire everyone knew. His shoulders sagged, his tie hung loose, and his eyes were fixed on the horizon as though searching for answers he couldn't buy. Ella hesitated, her heart thudding. Part of her wanted to turn back to protect herself. But another part, the part that had felt seen in his words, made her step forward. "You listened," she said quietly. Adrian turned. His face softened the moment he saw her, relief washing over him like sunlight breaking through clouds. "And you came," or she nodded, crossing her arms, though her voice was gentler than her stance. "You finally spoke. Not as Adrian Vale, the billionaire. Just you." He gave a small, rueful laugh. "You make it sound like that's harder than building an empire."
"Isn't it?"
she asked, tilting her head. He grew serious, stepping closer but careful not to invade her space. "Ella, that night when I dared you, I thought I was teaching you a lesson. But you taught me one instead. You showed me I've been hiding behind arrogance, behind money. And when you walked away, I realized I didn't want to go back to the man I was." Her breath caught. There was no smirk, no bravado. Just truth. "Do you know what it's like," he continued, his voice low, "to have everything and feel nothing? To walk into rooms full of people who pretend to love you, but never feel seen? You changed that? You changed me?" Illa swallowed hard. Her instinct was to protect herself, to remind him of the headlines, the whispers, the way his world had nearly crushed her. Yet looking at him now, she saw not the arrogant man who had mocked her, but the one who had stood on stage and admitted his emptiness. "Adrian," she said softly, "change doesn't happen overnight. Words are easy, but actions—" "I know," he interrupted quickly, his voice thick with urgency. "I don't expect forgiveness in a single conversation. Just a chance to prove it. To prove that I can be more than who I was." For a long moment, Ella searched his face, and slowly her shoulders relaxed. "Then prove it," she whispered. "Not to me, to yourself." It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet. But it was forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, the fragile beginning of something more.